I don't know who let you up here, but this floor is for people who actually belong here.
Danica Hilton said while sizing him up.
My name is Charlie Ellison, and I have a 9:45 meeting here.
Charlie replied, keeping his voice steady.
Charlie Ellison.
She repeated his name, then scoffed.
Sure you do, sweetheart. Brody, be a dear and get him out of my conference room.
Her security guard stepped forward and grabbed his arm. Charlie let himself be moved, without a flinch, without even looking back at the woman who had just had him removed from her own building like he was nothing. What Danica Hilton didn't know was that the man she'd just thrown out controlled every dollar that stood between her company and total collapse. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The badge said, Contractor. Charlie Ellison looked down at it for a second. Just 1 second. Then he clipped it onto his polo shirt and followed the receptionist to the elevator in silence. He didn't say a word. The girl who handed it to him, young, nervous, barely looked up from her desk, had taken one look at him when he walked through the glass doors of Hilton Meridian and made a decision. Not a mean decision. Not a thought-out decision. Just a fast, automatic one. The kind people make without even knowing they're making it. Polo shirt. No tie. Black man walking in alone. Must be maintenance. Charlie had been in enough rooms to know when it was happening. He felt it the same way you feel a change in weather before the clouds actually roll in. A pressure shift. Subtle, but real. Some battles weren't worth fighting in a lobby. The elevator opened on the 34th floor, and the receptionist pointed him toward the conference room at the end of the hall. The walls were glass, all of them, floor to ceiling. The kind of design that made everyone visible to everyone else, like a fishbowl built to impress clients. From the hallway, Charlie could see straight into the main conference room. 6 people in suits sat around a long table. At the head stood Danica Hilton. She was younger than he expected. 38, sharp jaw, cream-colored blazer, blonde hair pulled back tight. She had a clicker in one hand and a laser pointer in the other, and she moved through her presentation with the kind of loose, effortless confidence that came from a lifetime of never once being told no. She didn't look up when he walked in. He stood just inside the doorway and waited. 1 second. 2, 3. She clicked to the next slide. "Excuse me," Charlie said. His voice was calm. Even. Danica's eyes dragged up from the screen, slow and deliberate. The way you look at something you've already decided isn't worth your time. Oh, wow. She tilted her head and let her eyes travel from his shoes all the way up to his face, taking her time. A thin smile crossed her lips. "Okay, I don't know who dropped the ball downstairs, but contractors use the service entrance. On 2. She pointed toward the door with her laser pointer like she was directing a dog. "That's the one without the marble floors, in case the decor confused you." A couple of the people at the table shifted in their seats. Nobody looked up. "My name is Charlie Ellison," he said. "I have a 9:45. Danica blinked. Then she laughed. A short, sharp sound, like a door slamming. "Charlie Ellison!" She repeated his name the way people repeat a bad joke to make sure they heard it right. "Sure you do, sweetheart." She turned back to her screen and clicked to the next slide. "Look, I'm sure whoever told you that thought they were being very helpful. But this floor is for scheduled meetings with actual stakeholders, not—" She waved her hand in his general direction without looking at him. "Whatever this is." The door behind Charlie opened fast. Danica's assistant, a young woman in a gray blazer, tablet pressed to her chest, slipped inside and leaned close to Danica's ear. Charlie watched Danica's face as the assistant whispered. For just a moment, something moved behind those polished blue eyes. A flicker. There and gone. "I don't care," Danica said. Not to her assistant, to the room. Loud, clear, deliberate. She snapped the clicker into the nearest executive's hand and tugged her blazer straight. I have 20 minutes before people who actually belong here show up, and I am not doing this right now. She finally looked back at Charlie, eyes flat, smile sharper. There a reason you're still standing in my conference room? Because I promise you, wherever you need to be, it isn't here. She said it like it was funny, like he was funny. Just outside the glass wall, in the small waiting area near the 34th floor reception desk, Jones Wilford sat alone on a leather bench. He was 51 years old, an architect from a mid-sized firm 2 floors below, waiting on a permit consultation that was already running 15 minutes late. He had his phone out, half scrolling through emails, when the scene inside the conference room caught his eye. He stopped scrolling. He watched for a moment. The woman with the laser pointer, the calm man by the door, the body language that needed no explanation. Jones had spent 30 years reading rooms, floor plans, structures, the way things were built and what they were built to say. He knew what he was looking at. Slowly, he raised his phone. He wasn't trying to start anything. He just knew that nobody believed anything they didn't see with their own eyes. He pressed record. Behind Charlie, the conference room door opened again. A large man filled the frame, security badge clipped at his hip, shoulders like a refrigerator, expression completely blank. Brody. Danica didn't even glance up. There we go. She picked up her clicker again. Brody, be a dear and walk our contractor back to wherever he came from. She said it like it was the easiest thing she'd said all morning. Like it was nothing. Like he was nothing. Brody stepped forward and placed one thick hand on Charlie's arm. Not rough, but firm and deliberate. The kind of grip designed to move someone without making a scene. Charlie let himself be moved. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. He walked with Brody back down the hall, back to the elevator, his leather watch catching the light on his wrist. The same watch Emma gave him the day he closed his first $1 million deal, 12 years ago, back when people looked at him the same way Danica just had. The elevator doors slid open. Charlie stepped inside. The doors closed. He looked at his reflection in the polished metal, polo shirt, khakis, contractor badge, and the corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Not yet. The floor went quiet. Not the polite kind of quiet that falls over a room when something awkward happens. The deep, held breath kind. The kind where everyone can feel exactly what's happening, but nobody wants to be the one who reacts to it. Through the glass walls of the 34th floor, the whole open office had a front-row view. Executive assistants, junior analysts, mid-level managers killing time between meetings. All of them stopped. All of them watched. And not a single one of them moved. Brody walked Charlie toward the elevator with one hand still gripped around his arm. Not dragging him. Not rough. Just steady and firm and deliberate. The way you walk someone when you want them to know the choice has already been made for them. Charlie walked. Head up. Shoulders back. Eyes forward. He didn't look at anyone. He didn't need to. He could feel every set of eyes on him from behind those glass panels. Could feel the particular weight of a floor full of people watching something happen that they knew was wrong and choosing to be very busy all of a sudden. One woman at a standing desk turned her monitor slightly, pretended to read something on the screen. A man near the printer grabbed a stack of papers he didn't need and shuffled them. A younger guy in a too-big blazer dropped his pen on purpose just to have a reason to look down. Nobody said a word. In the waiting area near the reception desk, Jones Wilford hadn't moved from his bench. His permit consultation was still running late. His phone was still raised. He kept it steady. 30 years of drawing straight lines without a tremor in his hand, watching the whole thing play out through the glass like a window into something he couldn't look away from. He'd seen enough in his life to know what this was. He kept recording. Near the hallway, Priya Orwig stood with her notepad pressed flat against her chest. She was 27 years old and had worked on this floor for 16 months. She had watched a lot of things on this floor that she wished she hadn't. But this was something else. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes followed Charlie and Brody all the way down the hall. She didn't look away. She didn't pretend to be busy. She just stood there and watched, and let herself feel every uncomfortable inch of it, because someone in this building ought to. Behind the glass, Danica Hilton had already turned back to her presentation. That was the part that landed hardest. Not the escort. Not Brody. The turning back. The complete, effortless return to business. Like removing Charlie from the room was no different from clearing a coffee cup off the table. She clicked to the next slide. She said something to the executive beside her. She laughed at something. A real laugh, loose and easy. One of the people at the table glanced toward the hallway where Charlie had just been walked out. Just for a second. Then back to the screen. That was it. That was all. The elevator bay was at the far end of the hall. Brody slowed when they reached it and pressed the down button without letting go of Charlie's arm. They stood there together. The big man in the security badge and the man in the polo shirt and the watch, waiting for the doors to open. Charlie turned his head and looked through the glass one last time. Danica was pointing at something on the presentation screen. Her executives were nodding. The room had moved on completely, like he'd never been there at all. Like he was nothing. The elevator bell chimed softly. The doors slid open. Brody guided him inside and released his arm. Stepped back into the hallway without a word. Didn't look Charlie in the eye once. Not the whole walk. Not now. Just stared at a fixed point above the elevator doors until they closed between them. The last thing Charlie saw before the doors shut was the 34th floor. The glass walls. The frozen staff. The conference room where Danica was already mid-sentence about something else entirely. And standing at the edge of the hallway, perfectly still, was Priya Orwig. She was looking directly at him. Not with pity. Not with the guilty half-smile of someone who wanted credit for feeling bad. With something steadier than that. Something that said, I saw it. All of it. And I'm not going to pretend I didn't. The doors closed. The elevator began to move. Charlie stood alone in the small mirrored box and said nothing. Did nothing. Just breathed. Just let the floor numbers tick down one by one. 34, 33, 32. Back in the waiting area, Jones Wilford slowly lowered his phone. He looked at the screen for a long moment. The footage clear, the audio clean, every word and every second of it captured. Brody's hand on Charlie's arm. Danica's smile. The floor full of people looking anywhere but at the man being walked out. He pressed save. Grace Walsh was already standing in the lobby when the elevator doors opened. She had 2 coffees. She took one look at Charlie's face and held one out without saying a word. He took it. They started walking toward the revolving doors. Same pace, same direction, like they'd done 100 times before. Grace matched his stride exactly. She always did. 21 years of working alongside this man had given her a particular kind of fluency in his silences. She could read him the way a doctor reads a chart. Fast, accurate, no guessing. How bad? She said. Security escort. She exhaled slowly through her nose. Not surprised. Just tired in the specific way. You get tired when the world keeps confirming things you already knew about it. Did you say anything? No. She nodded once. Good. They were 10 feet from the revolving door when it happened. Upstairs on the 34th floor, Danica Hilton's personal cell phone rang. Not her office line, not her assistant's extension. Her personal phone, the number that lived in exactly 12 contacts across the entire country. Board members, her father's old attorney, 2 sitting senators, people whose calls she answered before the second ring, no matter what she was in the middle of. She glanced at the screen. Raymond Oliver, Pinnacle Sovereign Fund. She stepped away from her executives and answered. Raymond spoke for about 45 seconds, maybe less. He didn't waste words. He never did. He told her the name of the man her security guard had just walked to the elevator. He told her what that man controlled. He told her what was at stake. And then he told her that the window for fixing this mistake was closing faster than she probably realized. The color left Danica's face in stages. She hung up and immediately called Derek Ashby. Derek answered on the first ring. He was still at the conference table, laptop open, half listening to the tail end of her presentation. When she said Charlie Ellison's name, he went very still. Danica, tell me Raymond Oliver is wrong. Silence. Derek, he's not wrong. Derek's voice came out flat and careful, the way voices get when someone is choosing every word like they're stepping across ice. Ellison controls the Pinnacle Fund through 3 holding companies. It's structured to keep his name off the front page. I found it 3 weeks ago when I was running the investor profiles. I was going to brief you before the meeting, but you said, "Stop." Her voice went sharp as a blade. "Stop talking." She was already moving toward the elevator. Charlie and Grace had just pushed through the revolving door into the morning sun when they heard it. "Mr. Ellison." They both stopped. Danica Hilton crossed the lobby toward them at a pace that was almost running, but trying very hard not to be. Her blazer was still perfect. Her hair was still perfect. But something behind her eyes had cracked open in the last 4 minutes, and no amount of polish was covering it. She stopped a few feet away, clasped her hands in front of her, lifted her chin slightly. An old reflex, the body trying to hold a posture the situation no longer supported. "I owe you an apology," she said. The words came out smooth and practiced, like she'd coached herself on the elevator ride down. "There was clearly a miscommunication this morning about your appointment, and I—" "There wasn't a miscommunication," Charlie said. "Not mean, not loud, just true." Danica's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She reset. Be that as it may. She took a small step closer, dropping her voice half a register. "I'd like to ask you to come back upstairs. We can get you a proper seat at the table, proper introductions, and I'd very much like to begin our conversation today, if that's still—" "It's not," she blinked. "I need the week to review your prospectus properly." He held her gaze. "My team will be in touch this afternoon to confirm logistics." "We're on a tight timeline," she said. The smoothness slipped just slightly. "Our bond situation requires—" "I know what your bond situation requires." He said it gently. That was somehow worse. Danica Hilton stood on the sidewalk outside her own building and looked at Charlie Ellison. Really looked at him, maybe for the first time that morning. And something moved across her face that had no name, but was somewhere in the neighborhood of understanding arriving much too late. Charlie glanced briefly at Grace. Grace looked at her coffee cup. "Tomorrow," Charlie said. "9 a.m., my office." He turned toward the street. Grace fell into step beside him. Neither of them looked back. The revolving door was still spinning behind them when Danica finally moved. Jones Wilford never did get his permit consultation. By the time someone from the property management office finally came to find him in the waiting area, he was already gone. He'd watched the whole thing play out. The escort, the glass walls, the floor full of people staring at their screens, and somewhere between the elevator doors closing and the security guard walking back to his post, he'd made a decision. He walked 2 blocks to a coffee shop, sat down at a corner table, and posted the video. He wasn't a political person. Didn't have many followers, maybe 400, mostly colleagues and old college friends. He wrote one line above the clip. "Watched this happen this morning. The man they threw out runs a $2.3 billion fund." She had no idea. Then he put his phone face down on the table and ordered a coffee. Upstairs on the 34th floor, Priya Orwig sat at her desk and stared at her monitor without reading a single word on the screen. She'd been sitting like that for 20 minutes. The open plan office hummed around her, keyboards clicking, someone's phone ringing twice and going to voicemail, the low murmur of a call happening behind a closed door somewhere. Normal Tuesday sounds, as if nothing had happened. As if the whole floor hadn't just stood there and watched a man get walked out like he didn't belong, and then quietly gone back to work the moment the elevator doors shut. Priya pulled up her personal social media on her phone under the desk. Jones's video was already there, posted 40 minutes ago. She recognized the angle immediately. The waiting area outside reception, shot through the glass. Clean footage. Every word clear. You could see Danica's face. You could see Charlie's face. You could see Brody's hand on Charlie's arm. You could see the entire floor doing absolutely nothing. Priya watched it twice. Then she shared it to her own page without a caption. She had 340 followers, mostly family. A few old college friends, her mother in Savannah. She put her phone away and went back to staring at her screen. By the time Charlie and Grace reached Ellison Capital's Midtown offices, Jones's video had 40,000 views. Grace saw it first. She put her phone on Charlie's desk without saying anything and let him watch it. He watched it once, all the way through, expression unreadable. Then he set the phone down and opened his laptop. "You want to talk about it?" Grace said. "No." She picked her phone back up. "Okay." By lunch, the view count was past 120,000. By mid-afternoon, the comments were running faster than anyone could read them. People tagging news accounts, sharing it to their own pages, writing long paragraphs about what they'd just watched. Jones had given 3 brief follow-up interviews to reporters who tracked him down through his firm's website. He kept saying the same thing every time. "I just knew what I was looking at." At 4:15, Grace knocked on Charlie's open office door. 340,000 views. Charlie didn't look up from his work. "Close the door on your way out." She smiled at the back of his head and pulled the door shut. He left the office at 5:30. Stopped at a grocery store on the way home because his youngest had asked for strawberries 2 days ago, and he hadn't gotten around to it yet. He bought the strawberries. He bought pasta. He drove the rest of the way home with the radio off and the windows down. His daughters were at the kitchen table when he walked in. 9-year-old Maya doing long division on a worksheet. 11-year-old Dana reading a chapter book with a flashlight, even though every light in the kitchen was on. They both looked up. "Dad." "Hey, babies." He helped Maya with the long division. He made pasta. He listened to Dana explain the entire plot of her book across dinner with the focused intensity only an 11-year-old could sustain. He washed the dishes. He put them both to bed and sat on the edge of each of their mattresses for a few minutes longer than he needed to. Then he went to his study. Emma's photograph was on the corner of the desk. Same spot it always was, same silver frame, same smile. He touched the edge of the frame once, the way he always did, and sat down. The Hilton Meridian prospectus was in a folder beside the keyboard. 7 developments. Thousands of families. Numbers and addresses and projections laid out across 40 clean pages that told a story they were very carefully designed not to tell. He opened it. His phone rang. "Grace." He answered. "Talk to me," Charlie said. He had the prospectus open on the desk in front of him. Emma's photograph in the corner. The house quiet around him. Both girls asleep. The kitchen still smelling faintly of pasta and dish soap. "I've been in the municipal records for the last 4 hours," Grace said. Her voice had that particular flatness it got when she'd found something that made her angry, but she was holding it together until she could lay it out properly. Pull up page 12 of the prospectus, the development breakdown. He turned to it. You see the 7 sites? I see them. Look at Linwood Street, Grayson Commons, Parkview South. She paused. Now look at the completion dates versus the occupancy reclassifications. Charlie looked. He read the numbers once. Then he read them again. They convert, he said. Every single time. Her voice tightened. Groundbreaking happens. The city hands over the subsidies. The local news runs a feel-good story about affordable housing coming to the neighborhood. Then construction takes 18 months. And then, quietly, in the permit filings, buried in the zoning reclassifications, the buildings go market rate. She took a breath. 4 out of 7 developments. Same pattern. Same timeline. Same result. Charlie sat back in his chair. How many families? Linwood Street alone, 340 families, 3 generations of people in that neighborhood. Gone. Grace's voice dropped. Parkview South, another 212. Grayson Commons, they cleared out almost an entire block. These weren't vacant lots they were building on, Charlie. These were people's homes, people's lives. And Hilton Meridian walked in with city money, made all the right speeches, broke ground on a Tuesday with a news crew there to film it. And then, 18 months later, those same families were looking for somewhere else to go. The prospectus sat open on the desk in front of him. 40 clean pages, professional fonts, color-coded maps showing the 7 proposed sites in southwest Atlanta. The language was careful and warm throughout. Community investment, neighborhood revitalization, affordable living initiatives. The kind of language designed to make something ugly sound like a gift. Charlie closed it. Not hard, just slowly and deliberately. The way you close a door on something you need a moment away from. The current proposal, he said. Cascade Commons. 2,200 families, Grace said. Southwest Atlanta. Predominantly black neighborhood. City subsidies already approved. 4.8 million. Ground hasn't broken yet. She paused. If this deal goes through the way Danica has it structured, those families have maybe 2 years before the reclassification paperwork starts. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Outside Charlie's window, the neighborhood was completely still. A dog barked somewhere down the street and went quiet. The kind of ordinary, peaceful Tuesday night that 2,200 families in southwest Atlanta were living right now, not knowing what was already being planned around their kitchen tables and front porches and children's bedrooms. Keep digging, Charlie said. Already am. He set the phone down without hanging up. Grace always stayed on the line when she was mid-investigation, the way some people kept the TV on for company, and stared at the closed prospectus. 45 minutes passed. He heard Grace typing in the background, the occasional sound of a mouse click. Once, the soft thud of what sounded like a thick folder being dropped onto a desk. Then, Charlie. Something in the way she said it made him sit forward. Talk to me. The bond default. She chose her words carefully, the way you handle something fragile. It wasn't an accident. He waited. Someone shorted Hilton Meridian's debt instruments. Bought the short positions 2 weeks ago. She paused. 2 weeks ago is the same week your team made the first quiet inquiries about the investment. The same week Raymond reached out to their fund administrator to request preliminary financials. The room felt suddenly smaller. Someone knew we were looking, Charlie said. Someone knew you were coming, Grace said. And they want this company to collapse. Not quietly. Not on its own timeline. Another pause. They want it to collapse with your name attached to it. Charlie didn't move, didn't speak. just sat at his desk in the dark with Emma's photograph in the corner and the closed prospectus in front of him and the slow, clarifying weight of understanding settling across his shoulders like something physical. This wasn't a business deal anymore. It wasn't even personal anymore. Or not only personal. It was a trap, carefully built, patiently set, waiting for him to walk into it, wearing his own good intentions like a blindfold. He picked up the prospectus again, opened it back to page 12. 2,200 families. He looked at Emma's photograph for a long moment. Then he picked up his pen. Wednesday morning came in gray and quiet. Charlie was at his desk by 7:15. Grace arrived at 7:30 with coffee and a folder of overnight research updates. They worked in near silence for an hour, the kind of focused, unhurried quiet that meant both of them were thinking hard about the same thing without needing to say it out loud. At 8:45, Grace appeared in his doorway. "They're downstairs." Charlie closed his laptop. "All three of them. Danica, Ashby, and a corporate attorney I don't recognize. Young, expensive suit." She set a fresh coffee on the corner of his desk. "She got here 15 minutes early." "I know." Grace studied him for a moment. "You want me in the room?" "No." He stood and straightened his polo shirt. Same style as yesterday. Different color. No tie. No performance. Put them in the small conference room. Not the main one. Grace allowed herself a small smile. The small conference room had no view, no artwork, and chairs that were comfortable but not impressive. It was the room Charlie used for conversations he wanted to keep plain. She understood exactly what he was doing. "Give me 5 minutes," he said. Danica Hilton was already seated when Charlie walked in. She had arranged herself carefully. Blazer buttoned, portfolio open, reading glasses set just so on the table in front of her, like props in a scene she'd rehearsed. The corporate attorney, a sharp-faced woman named Voss, sat to her left with a legal pad. Derek Ashby sat to her right, laptop open, eyes moving to Charlie the moment he entered. Charlie shook hands with each of them, sat down, set nothing on the table. "Go ahead," he said to Danica. She went ahead. The pitch was polished. It had clearly been rebuilt overnight. Tighter language, stronger numbers, the community benefit framing pushed to the front where it would do the most work. Danica moved through it with total confidence, her voice warm and measured, hitting every note she wanted to hit. She talked about the 7 developments. She talked about Southwest Atlanta. She used words like legacy and impact and transformation without blinking once. Charlie listened. He didn't take notes, didn't nod along, didn't give her the small, encouraging reactions that people unconsciously offer when a presentation is landing. He just sat with his hands folded on the table and listened, and let the silence around his listening do its work. When she finished, he asked his first question. "Linwood Street, the 2017 development. What's the current occupancy demographic?" A beat. Just a small one. Half a second. But Charlie felt it. "Linwood was a different market cycle," Danica said smoothly. "The economic conditions at completion required us to—" "I'm asking about the current demographic. Who lives there now?" Voss leaned slightly toward Danica. Danica didn't look at her. "The building transitioned to market-rate housing at completion," she said. "That was disclosed in the city filings." "It was," Charlie agreed pleasantly. "What about Grayson Commons? The HUD grant, $4.2 million. Where did that land on the final project accounting?" The temperature in the room dropped by several degrees. Derek Ashby's eyes moved from Charlie to Danica and back again. He hadn't opened his laptop once since Charlie walked in. He was holding very still in the particular way of someone who was used to being very still in difficult rooms. Danica answered every question. She was good, genuinely good. The kind of good that comes from years of practice explaining things that don't fully add up to people who want to believe they do. She never stumbled, never deflected in an obvious way. just kept her voice warm and her language careful, and her eyes steady on Charlie's face. But Charlie kept asking, question after question, each one casual on the surface, each one landing somewhere specific underneath. He wasn't arguing with her. He wasn't accusing her of anything. He was just asking about facts, one at a time, in a tone so even and unhurried that it took Danica several minutes to realize that every answer she gave was quietly closing another door behind her. Twice, Charlie glanced at Derek. The second time, Derek looked back. And in that brief, unguarded moment, Charlie saw exactly what he'd suspected the night before. Not guilt, precisely, but the exhausted, sunken look of a man who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time and was beginning to feel the weight of it in his bones. At the meeting's close, Charlie sat back. "I'll need 48 hours. Full due diligence." Danica's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Our bond window closes in 72 hours. I know." He said it without drama. "You'll hear from me." They stood, handshakes, brief, professional, hollow. Danica held his hand a half-second longer than necessary, one last small attempt at warmth that had nowhere to land. As they filed out, Grace appeared at the door and pressed a folded note into Charlie's hand. He read it. Priya Orwig, the analyst who filmed the lobby. Danica fired her this morning. He folded it once and set it on the table. Get her number. Grace had Priya Orwig's number within the hour. She didn't call it yet. Charlie asked her to wait. He wanted the full picture first, before they brought anyone else into the room. So Grace set the number aside and turned her attention back to the audit. And by early Wednesday afternoon, Ellison Capital's three-person research team had spread themselves across 2 conference tables with laptops, printed records, and municipal filing databases going back 11 years. Charlie moved between them like a man reading a map he already suspected was wrong, checking coordinates, testing distances, looking for the places where the lines didn't connect the way they were supposed to. It didn't take long. Linwood Street came first. The building had been a mixed-income residential complex in southwest Atlanta, 340 units, occupied almost entirely by black families who had lived in that neighborhood for decades, some of them for 3 generations. Grandparents who remembered the street before the highway went in. Parents who'd raised kids in those apartments. Kids who were now adults with kids of their own. In 2015, Hilton Meridian approached the city with a proposal. Renovation, modernization, affordable housing preserved and improved. The pitch was clean, and the language was moving, and the city approved $2.1 million in development subsidies within 6 months. Danica Hilton was 31 years old when she signed the approval documents. Construction began in 2016. The news coverage was warm. A local TV segment showed Danica in a hard hat at the groundbreaking, smiling for the camera beside the district councilman. She talked about community. She talked about investment. She talked about the families who would benefit. By 2017, the building had been reclassified. Market rate. Luxury finishes. Rooftop terrace. A rebrand with a new name that didn't sound anything like the old one. 340 families. Gone. Charlie stood over the printed records for a long moment without speaking. One of his analysts, a young woman named Tara, had highlighted the reclassification filing in yellow. The date was 14 months after groundbreaking, almost to the day. He moved to the next table. Grayson Commons was worse. In 2018, Hilton Meridian had applied for a HUD Community Partnership grant to support affordable housing development in Memphis. The application was detailed and compelling, exactly the kind of proposal that grant committees approved quickly and enthusiastically. $4.2 million was awarded in early 2019. The money was supposed to go directly into construction costs for a 200-unit affordable housing complex in a low-income Memphis neighborhood. Instead, it went into Hilton Meridian's operating budget. Not all at once. That would have been too obvious. It moved in pieces, through a series of internal transfers that were technically legal if you squinted at them from the right angle and didn't ask too many questions. Derek Ashby, then 33 years old and 4 years into his tenure as CFO, had processed every transfer personally. A HUD audit in 2020 flagged the irregularities. Hilton Meridian's legal team filed for arbitration the following week. The arbitration ran for 3 years, long enough for the original auditors to rotate off the case and the paperwork to get buried under subsequent filings. The affordable housing complex in Memphis was never built. Charlie read the audit report twice. Then he slid it across the table to Grace, who read it once and set it down, without a word. They came to Cascade Commons last. The documents Tara had assembled told the familiar story in its clearest form yet. 2,200 families, city subsidies already approved, ground not yet broken. But it was the internal communications that made everything else stop mattering. A strategy memo, dated 2022, authored by Danica Hilton herself. The language was precise and completely without shame. Phase 1, community engagement and groundbreaking. Phase 2, construction with full public-facing affordable housing positioning. Phase 3, and here was the line that Charlie read 3 times to make sure he was reading it correctly. Transition to market rate can begin at 14 months. 14 months. Not a contingency. Not a possibility. A schedule. Charlie set the memo down on the table and looked out the window for a moment at the gray Atlanta afternoon. Get everything to legal, he said quietly. Every document, every filing, every transfer record. Already packaging it, Tara said, and pull Senator Orvis's direct line. He turned from the window. Not his office, his cell. Grace was already writing it down. Charlie picked up the Cascade Commons memo one more time, read Danica's line again, set it face down on the table because he didn't need to read it a 4th time. He already knew exactly what it said. 2,200 families. He thought about the strawberries he'd bought his daughter last night, about the quiet street outside his window, about what it meant to live somewhere and believe, really believe, that you were safe there. Grace. She looked up. Call Priya Orwig. Priya Orwig arrived at 8:53 Thursday morning. She came through the front entrance of Ellison Capital with a laptop bag over one shoulder and a manila folder pressed against her chest like she was holding it together with both hands. She was 27 years old, and she had been fired less than 24 hours ago. She looked like someone who hadn't slept, but had made a decision sometime in the middle of the night and was moving on it before she could talk herself out of it. Grace met her in the lobby. She didn't take Priya straight to Charlie. That wasn't how Grace operated. Instead, she walked her to the small kitchen at the end of the hall, poured 2 cups of coffee without asking, and sat down across from her at the narrow table like they had all the time in the world. "How are you doing?" Grace said. Priya looked at her for a moment, like she was checking whether the question was real or just a formality. Apparently, she decided it was real. "I've been better," she said. "I imagine." Grace wrapped both hands around her mug. "Take your time." Priya had started at Hilton Meridian 16 months ago. Fresh out of graduate school, sharp and eager, genuinely believing. The way you only believe things before the world has had enough time to correct you, that real estate development could be a tool for community good. She'd written her graduate thesis on affordable housing policy. She'd applied to Hilton Meridian specifically because of the community development pipeline. It took her about 4 months to understand what she had actually walked into. Not all at once. It happened in layers. A comment in a meeting that didn't sit right. A set of internal transfer records she wasn't supposed to see that crossed her desk by accident. A conversation between two senior directors she overheard through a half-closed office door, casual and completely unguarded. The way people talk when they've said something so many times, it stopped feeling wrong. Phase 3, transition. 14 months. She started keeping copies 8 months ago. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that required accessing systems she wasn't authorized to use. Just documents that passed through her desk in the normal course of her job. Emails she was CC'd on. Meeting minutes she was asked to transcribe. Financial summaries routed through her workstation for formatting. She saved everything to an external drive she kept in the bottom of her laptop bag. She hadn't known what she was going to do with it. She just knew that someone, somewhere, was going to need to see it. And she knew that when that moment came, she wanted to be ready. "Tuesday morning," Grace said. "When you saw what happened on your floor." Priya nodded. "I knew that was the moment." She looked down at her coffee. "I just needed to know if he was the right person." And she looked up. He walked out of that building without saying a single word, without losing anything. She paused. "That told me everything I needed to know." Charlie came in 20 minutes later. He sat down across from Priya, nodded once, and said, "Tell me what you have." She told him. Then she opened the laptop bag. It took the better part of 2 hours. Priya walked Charlie and Grace through every document, methodically, clearly, in the organized way of someone who had spent 8 months building a case, even before she knew it was a case. Emails, financial transfer records, internal meeting minutes, contractor agreements that didn't match their stated purposes, a chain of communications between Danica and a city permitting official that had no business existing in the format it was in. And then, near the bottom of the stack, Priya slid a single printed document across the table. Charlie recognized it immediately. The Cascade Commons Strategy Memo. Danica's 2022 internal document, the one his own team had found the day before through their audit research. But Priya's copy was different. It had annotations, handwritten notes in the margins, Danica's handwriting, identified by the matching signature on the front page. Notes that spelled out the Phase 3 timeline with even less ambiguity than the typed text. Numbers, dates, names of specific city officials whose cooperation had already been secured. Charlie looked at it for a long time. "This came through your desk?" he said. "She asked me to format it for a board presentation," Priya said. "I formatted it, and I kept a copy." He looked at her across the table. 27 years old. Student loans. A mother in a Hilton Meridian-managed building in Savannah who had no idea what her daughter had been carrying for the past 8 months. "You understand what this means," he said. "Going forward." "Yes," Priya said. She didn't hesitate. That evening, after Priya had left, and the documents had been transferred securely to Charlie's legal team, Charlie sat alone in his office and dialed Senator Paul Orvis's personal cell. Orvis answered on the second ring. He was 58 years old, 20 years Charlie's senior, a man who had mentored him at Howard University when Charlie was a 23-year-old undergraduate, still figuring out the full size of what he was capable of. They had stayed close in the 2 decades since. Not the kind of close that needed constant contact, but the kind that meant something when it mattered. Charlie talked for 40 minutes. He laid out everything. Linwood Street, Grayson Commons, the engineered bond default, the Cascade Commons memo, Priya's documents, the annotated copy. He spoke plainly and in order, the way he always did when the thing he was describing was serious enough to not need any dressing up. Orvis didn't interrupt once. When Charlie finished, there was a brief silence. "Send me everything," Orvis said. "Tonight?" "Tonight." Charlie ended the call. He sat in the quiet office for a moment, the city visible through the window, lights beginning to appear in the early evening dark. Somewhere out there, 2,200 families sitting down to dinner without any idea that a woman in a cream-colored blazer had already scheduled the beginning of their displacement. He picked up his phone again, called home. Maya answered on the first ring, which meant she'd been sitting next to the phone. She talked for 4 straight minutes about something that happened at school involving a class hamster before Charlie could get a word in. He listened to every second of it. Some things you held on to harder than others. The term sheet arrived at 6:17 Thursday evening. 12 pages, clean formatting. Language that had taken Charlie's legal team the better part of 2 days to get exactly right. Precise enough to be binding. Clear enough that nobody could later claim they hadn't understood what they were agreeing to. Charlie read it twice at his desk, made 2 small notes in the margin, sent the notes back to his attorney. By 7:45, the final version was in his hands, and at 8 o'clock exactly, he forwarded it to Danica Hilton's corporate email with a single line. Terms attached. Response required by midnight. Then he leaned back in his chair and waited. The terms were not negotiable. The first condition was a binding community benefit agreement covering all 7 proposed developments. Not suggestions, not guidelines, but hard legal commitments enforced by an independent oversight body with the authority to freeze construction at any stage if the terms were violated. Every affordable unit guaranteed for 30 years minimum. No reclassification. No Phase 3. The second condition was a resettlement assistance fund, capitalized at $8 million, drawn from the investment itself, dedicated to families displaced by Hilton Meridian's previous developments. Linwood Street, Grayson Commons, Parkview South, the people who had already lost. They wouldn't get their homes back, but they would get something. The third condition was Danica's resignation as CEO within 90 days. A board-selected successor, no golden parachute, no consulting arrangement that kept her influence in the building through a side door. The fourth condition was Derek Ashby's retention as CFO, not as a reward, but as a practical decision. Derek knew where everything was. Under a restructured accountability framework with independent financial oversight, he was more useful inside the company than out of it. It was a cold calculation, and Charlie knew it. He made it anyway. He sat at his desk and watched the clock. Danica's attorney called at 8:52. Charlie put the call on speaker and set the phone on the desk, and let the attorney, a man named Garfield whose voice had the particular aggressive energy of someone being paid by the confrontation, work through his objections. The community benefit agreement was overreaching. The oversight body was unconstitutional in its proposed structure. The resettlement fund had no legal precedent in a private investment agreement. Charlie's attorney answered each point in a tone so even it was almost gentle. Then Garfield got to the resignation clause. The call got louder. Charlie listened without speaking for 6 minutes, while Garfield explained, with increasing intensity, why asking Danica Hilton to step down from her own company was not only unreasonable, but potentially actionable as a form of corporate coercion. He used the word coercion 4 times. He used the phrase "my client's rights" 7 times. He let the silence after each point stretch long enough to feel like a threat. Charlie's attorney looked across the desk at Charlie. Charlie shook his head once. His attorney leaned toward the phone. The terms stand, all of them. Garfield hung up. At 9:40, Danica called directly. Charlie answered. She didn't yell. That wasn't her style. Not on a call she knew could be recorded, not at this stage of the game. Her voice was controlled and deliberate, each word placed carefully, like furniture arranged to block a door. "The resignation clause is a deal-breaker," she said. "I built this company. I am not signing away my own position as a condition of accepting investment." "Then we don't have a deal," Charlie said. A pause, long enough to mean something. "Charlie, Her voice shifted slightly. Not softer, exactly, but recalculated. I understand you have feelings about what happened Tuesday morning. I've already acknowledged that. But this is a business transaction, and tying it to a personnel decision is— The terms stand, Danica. Another pause. Longer this time. You have until midnight, he said, and ended the call. Nothing happened for 2 hours. Grace sat across the desk from Charlie, with sparkling water and a book she wasn't really reading. The office around them was empty. The rest of the staff had gone home at 6. The city outside the windows had settled into its nighttime version of itself, quieter and darker, the skyline holding still against the black sky. At 11:44, Charlie's attorney called. She's reviewing it with Garfield now. Okay. Charlie, if she doesn't sign by midnight, the bond default triggers automatically and— I know what happens, Charlie said. He set the phone down, looked at the clock on his laptop screen. 11:44, 11:51, 11:55. Grace put her book down and looked at the clock, too. Neither of them spoke. At 11:58, the email notification arrived. Charlie opened it. The term sheet. All 12 pages. Danica Hilton's electronic signature at the bottom. Neat, controlled, the signature of someone who had just made the hardest decision of her professional life and was determined not to look like it. Grace raised her sparkling water across the desk. We got her! Charlie stared at the screen. He waited for the feeling that was supposed to come. The release, the satisfaction, the clean and simple sense of a thing resolved. He waited for it the way you wait for a sound you expect to hear. It didn't come. Instead, there was something low and quiet at the back of his mind. Not a thought, exactly. More like a pressure. The particular unease of a man who has spent 20 years making deals and knows, on some level, he can't yet name, when something is sitting slightly wrong. He asked Grace to go home. She looked at him for a moment, reading his face the way she always did. Then she picked up her bag without arguing and said goodnight, and pulled the door shut behind her. Charlie sat alone in the empty office. He pulled the signed term sheet up on his screen and read it again from the beginning. Page 1, page 2, page 3. Something is wrong. He didn't know what yet. Charlie's phone rang at 6:14 Friday morning. He was already awake. He'd slept 4 hours, maybe 5, the kind of shallow, restless sleep that comes when your mind refuses to fully let go of something it hasn't figured out yet. He'd been lying in the dark staring at the ceiling for 20 minutes when the phone lit up on the nightstand. His attorney. Voice tight. Turn on your television. Business news. Any channel. Charlie was already reaching for the remote. The banner across the bottom of the screen read, Breaking, Billionaire. Charlie Ellison accused of orchestrating Hilton Meridian debt crisis for hostile takeover. He sat on the edge of the bed and watched. The anchor was composed and authoritative, reading from a prepared script with the practiced gravity of someone delivering news they know will travel far. The story, attributed to anonymous sources inside Hilton Meridian, claimed that Charlie Ellison had deliberately engineered the company's bond default, coordinating with short sellers to manufacture a financial crisis, then positioning himself as a rescuer to force a fire sale acquisition at a fraction of the company's real value. The community benefit framework, the story claimed, was a public relations cover, a carefully constructed mask designed to make a predatory corporate takeover look like an act of social conscience. Then came the documents. Internal communications from Ellison Capital, displayed on screen in fragments. Emails between Charlie's analysts using phrases like accelerating the timeline and maximizing pressure on the default window. And, most damaging of all, a line that read, Hilton collapse creates optimal entry conditions. Charlie stared at that last line. He knew exactly what it was. It came from a risk modeling exercise his team ran on every single acquisition target. A standard analytical process that mapped worst-case and best-case market scenarios. Every private equity firm in the country ran the same exercise. The line meant nothing except in isolation, stripped of the 40 pages of context surrounding it. In isolation, it looked like a confession. His attorney was still on the line. "Charlie, I see it. 3 of the institutional co-investors have already called my office before 7 a.m. He said nothing. "The term sheet, it hasn't gone to your board for ratification yet, which means it's not binding on your side. If this story takes hold before we can—" "I hear you," Charlie said. "Give me an hour." By 8 o'clock, the story had metastasized. It was on every major business network. It was trending across social media. The same platforms that 3 days ago had been flooded with Jones-Wilford's video of Danica walking Charlie out were now flooded with a different narrative entirely. Screenshots of the leaked documents, opinion segments, hot takes from commentators who had never heard Charlie Ellison's name before Tuesday and were now speaking about his character with total confidence. His phone didn't stop. 3 institutional co-investors, as his attorney had warned. 2 board members from companies where Charlie held non-executive director positions. A journalist from a financial publication asking for comment. Then another journalist. Then a third. And then, at 8:20, the notification that landed differently than all the others. The Crestwood Foundation, a civil rights organization Charlie had funded quietly and consistently for 8 years, nearly $3 million total, posted a public statement on their website. It was carefully written, clearly lawyered, and devastating in its precision. It did not accuse Charlie of anything. It simply stated that in light of the emerging reports, the Foundation felt it necessary to request clarity and transparency from all parties involved before making further public comment. Charlie read it twice. 8 years, $3 million. And the moment the first bad story broke, before a single fact had been verified, before anyone had asked him a single question, the statement was already drafted and posted. Grace arrived at the office at 8:30. She read the room before she read anything else, set a coffee on his desk, and pulled up every relevant screen without being asked. Neither of them said anything for a long time. At 8:37, a reporter reached Derek Ashby by phone. Derek's quote ran on the business network 12 minutes later, scrolling across the bottom of the screen in clean white text. "I can't comment on Mr. Ellison's intentions." 7 words. Perfectly neutral. Perfectly poisonous. Charlie looked at it on the screen for a moment. Then he looked away. At 8:47, his phone rang again. Danica Hilton. He let it ring twice. Then he answered. Her voice was completely calm. Not the fractured, recalibrated calm of Thursday night's phone call. This was something different. This was the composure of someone who had been holding a card in their hand since before Charlie ever walked into her building and had finally, at the moment of their choosing, put it on the table. "I think we need to renegotiate the terms, Charlie." She used his first name. Like they were old friends, like she had won. Grace didn't bring coffee. That was how Charlie knew she understood exactly how serious it was. In 21 years, Grace Walsh had never once walked into a room where Charlie was sitting without bringing coffee. It was the most reliable thing in his professional life. More reliable than markets, more reliable than contracts, more reliable than most people he'd ever done business with. She walked in at 9 o'clock Friday morning, stood at the window with her arms crossed, and looked out at the city. No coffee, no folder, no phone. Just the window, and the silence, and the particular stillness of a woman who was holding herself together by deciding not to move. Charlie sat at his desk, with Danica's words still sitting in his ear, like something that had burrowed in and made itself at home. "I think we need to renegotiate the terms, Charlie." He turned his chair toward the window, looked at Grace's back. "She played you," Grace said. She said it quietly and without cruelty. Not an accusation, just the truth delivered by someone who loved him enough to say it plainly. "She played the narrative," Charlie said. "There's a difference." Grace turned from the window. "Walk me through it," she said. He walked her through it. The timeline was clean once you saw it. Almost elegant, in the way that traps are elegant when they've been built by someone patient and intelligent and completely without conscience. Danica had signed the term sheet at 11:58 Thursday night, not because she intended to honor it, because signing gave her what she actually needed: a 12-hour window of apparent resolution, during which Charlie and Grace and the legal team would exhale and stand down while Danica's people quietly delivered a prepackaged story to every major business outlet on their contact list. A story built from real documents, stripped of all context, assembled to say exactly one thing: Charlie Ellison manufactured this crisis. The plan wasn't to survive the deal. The plan was to destroy it, blow up the agreement, discredit Charlie publicly, use the resulting chaos to push past the bond default window long enough to find a different buyer. A quieter one, a more compliant one who wouldn't arrive with 12 pages of non-negotiable community protections and a resignation clause. She had never intended to step down. She had never intended to honor the community benefit agreement. She had never intended to fund the resettlement assistance for the families her company had displaced. She had signed a document she was already planning to bury before the ink dried. Grace listened to all of it, without interrupting. When Charlie finished, she was quiet for a moment. "So, what do we do?" she said. Charlie straightened in his chair. "We make 3 phone calls." The first call was to his attorney. He kept it short. 3 instructions. Pull every internal communication cited in the news report, every single one, and release them in full, unredacted, with complete timestamps and the surrounding context that the leak had deliberately removed. No statement, no press conference, no spokesperson reading talking points from a podium. Just the raw documents, released proactively and completely, posted publicly within the hour. His attorney started to say something about legal risk. "The risk," Charlie said, "is letting the shadows stand. Flood them with light." A pause. "Yes, sir," his attorney said. The second call was to Priya Orwig. She answered on the first ring, which told him she'd been waiting. "I need you to do something difficult today," he said. "And I need you to understand that once you do it, there's no walking it back." A brief silence. "I've been not walking things back since Tuesday," Priya said. "Tell me what you need." He told her. A press conference, not a major network, not a corporate podium with a logo behind her. 3 specific journalists. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution housing beat. A documentary journalist who had spent 4 years on Southern displacement. A reporter from a Black-owned outlet with 2 million subscribers. 3 people who would know exactly what they were holding when Priya put the documents in their hands. "Today," Charlie said. "This afternoon, if you can manage it." "I can manage it," Priya said. The third call was to Senator Paul Orvis. Charlie dialed the personal cell, not the office line, not the chief of staff. The number that meant, "This is real, and it is urgent, and I need you," not your office. Orvis answered before the second ring was finished. "Paul," Charlie kept his voice steady, "I need 24 hours and 1 Senate hearing slot. I'll explain everything. I just need the room." A silence. Short. Maybe 4 seconds. The silence of a man who had known Charlie Ellison for 20 years and had never once heard him ask for something he didn't genuinely need. "You'll have it," Orvis said, before Charlie had fully finished the sentence. Charlie set the phone down on the desk. Across the room, Grace uncrossed her arms. Some of the tension in her shoulders dropped by a fraction. Not gone, but shifted. Changed in quality. The difference between a weight that is crushing you and a weight that you have decided to carry on purpose. She looked at Charlie. For the first time since 6:14 that morning, the room felt less like a place where something terrible had happened, and more like a place where something was being built. "Okay," Grace said. She finally went to get the coffee. The room Priya borrowed was nothing special. A plain conference room on the third floor of a shared office building 2 blocks from Ellison Capital. The kind of space that small nonprofits and independent consultants rented by the hour. Rectangular table, 8 chairs, a window that looked out onto a parking structure. No logo on the wall, no podium, no backdrop designed to make anyone look important. Priya had chosen it on purpose. She didn't want important. She wanted believed. The 3 journalists arrived within minutes of each other at 1:15 Friday afternoon. First through the door was Caroline Secrest from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. 53 years old, housing beat for 11 years, the kind of reporter who had spent a decade being handed press releases about community investment and had learned to read the space between the lines. She came in with a recorder and a legal pad and sat down without small talk. Next was Andre Bilski, the documentary journalist, early 40s, wire-rimmed glasses, a quiet intensity about him that made you feel like he was filing everything away, even when he wasn't taking notes. He'd spent 4 years embedded in southern communities affected by displacement. He had seen Linwood Street with his own eyes, had filmed families loading moving boxes into borrowed trucks on a Tuesday afternoon. He sat down next to Caroline and opened his laptop. Last was Keisha Mander from the Meridian Report, a Black-owned media outlet with 2.1 million subscribers and a reputation for stories that the major networks picked up 12 hours after Keisha had already broken them. She was 36, sharp and direct, and she had watched Jones Wilford's video 4 times on Tuesday and texted her editor after the second viewing. This one matters. Priya stood at the head of the table. She had the laptop bag in front of her. The manila folder. 8 months of work distilled into documents that told a story so clearly that they barely needed her to explain them. She looked at the 3 journalists. They looked back at her. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I'm going to show you everything. I'm going to answer every question you have. And then I'm going to ask you to report what you see, not what you've been told to see." Caroline clicked her recorder on. Priya opened the folder. She started with Linwood Street. She walked them through the timeline, the subsidies, the groundbreaking, the news segment with Danica Hilton in a hard hat, the reclassification filing 14 months later. She showed them the original community benefit promises in the city application. Then the final permit records that contradicted every one of them. She showed them photographs, not from any file, but ones she had found herself, taken by a local community organizer who had documented the displacement as it happened. Families on doorsteps with nowhere to go. Children sitting on packed boxes. Andre Bilski looked at the photographs for a long time without speaking. Then she showed them the Grayson Commons transfer records. The $4.2 million. Derek Ashby's signature on every internal transfer. The HUD audit. The 3-year arbitration that buried it. Keisha Mander had stopped typing. She was just reading. Then Priya slid the Cascade Commons strategy memo across the table. Caroline Secrest picked it up. Read it. Set it down. Picked it up again. "This is in her handwriting," Caroline said. The annotations in the margin. The Phase 3 timeline spelled out in Danica Hilton's own hand. "This is her actual handwriting. She asked me to format it for a board presentation," Priya said. "I formatted it. And you kept a copy." "I kept a copy." The room was very quiet for a moment. Keisha Mander sat back in her chair and looked at Priya with an expression that was not quite surprise and not quite admiration, but somewhere between the two. "You've been sitting on this for 8 months." "I was waiting for the right moment," Priya said, "and the right person." The questions ran for 90 minutes. Priya answered every single one. She didn't hedge. She didn't qualify. She spoke in the plain, direct language of someone who had rehearsed this conversation in her head so many times that the actual version felt almost simple by comparison. When it was over, the three journalists packed up in near silence. The particular silence of people who know they are holding something significant and are already thinking about what comes next. Caroline Secrest paused at the door. "You understand what this is going to do?" "Yes," Priya said. "To her, to the company, to you." "Yes," Priya said again. Same tone, same steadiness. Caroline looked at her for a moment. Then she nodded once, the small, specific nod of one woman recognizing something in another, and walked out. By 7 o'clock Friday evening, the stories were live. All three, published within 40 minutes of each other, each one carrying the full weight of the documents Priya had placed in their hands. By 8, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution piece had been shared 40,000 times. By 9, the Meridian Reports version was the top trending story on 2 platforms. By 10, the major networks that had spent all morning running the hit against Charlie were quietly pulling their earlier segments and replacing them with new ones. The civil rights organization that had posted its cautious statement at 8:20 that morning retracted it at 9:47 and replaced it with a full condemnation of Hilton Meridian. 3 paragraphs, unambiguous, signed by the executive director personally. 3 Atlanta City Council members issued a joint statement calling for an emergency review of all Hilton Meridian municipal contracts. Howdy announced, in a brief official notice posted to their website at 10:15, that the Grayson Commons audit had been formally reopened. Charlie read each story at his desk. Grace sat across from him, refreshing her screen every few minutes, watching the numbers climb. Neither of them celebrated. It wasn't that kind of moment. It was the kind of moment you moved through carefully, with your eyes open, because the work wasn't finished yet, and the people who needed protecting still needed protecting. Charlie set his phone face down on the desk, thought about 2,200 families in southwest Atlanta sitting down to dinner on a Friday night, picked up his phone again and dialed home. Maya answered on the first ring. Derek Ashby's apartment was on the 14th floor of a building in Buckhead. It was a nice apartment. Good view, good furniture, the kind of place that looked like a reward for 12 years of hard work and said nothing at all about what that work had actually required. Derek had moved in 4 years ago, right after Danica gave him his first significant bonus, a number that had felt, at the time, like validation, like proof that the choices he'd been making were the right ones. He sat on his couch Friday afternoon with the television on and a drink he hadn't touched on the coffee table in front of him. The coverage was everywhere. Not the morning coverage. Not the hit piece about Charlie that Danica's people had planted. The story that had felt, for about 4 hours, like it might actually hold. That story was collapsing in real time. Channel after channel, the framing was shifting. The documents Priya had handed those 3 journalists were moving through the media like water finding every crack, filling every space, impossible to stop once it started. Derek watched Caroline Secrest's piece run on the local news, watched Andre Bilski's documentary segment get picked up by a national cable network, watched Keisha Mander's story climb to the top of every trending list in real time, the share numbers climbing so fast the screen could barely keep up. He watched Danica Hilton's name get attached, in clear and specific language, to every displacement, every diverted grant, every family that had packed their things and left a neighborhood they'd lived in for generations because Hilton Meridian had decided their homes were more valuable without them in it. He watched his own name appear twice. Derek Ashby had not started out this way. That was the thing he came back to, sitting alone in the apartment that Danica's money had paid for. He hadn't started out as the man who processed the transfers, hadn't started out as the man who formatted the arbitration filings that buried the Grayson Commons audit, hadn't started out as the man who sat in a meeting room and said nothing, while a woman with a laser pointer had a black man walked out of her own building because he wasn't dressed the way money was supposed to look. He'd started out as a kid from Columbus, Ohio, with a graduate degree and a genuine belief that business could be done the right way. Danica had recruited him at 28, when he was still idealistic enough to believe that her community development pitch was real. By the time he understood what it actually was, he was 31, and his name was already on too many documents to walk away cleanly. So he'd stayed, and kept his head down, and processed the transfers, and watched the audits get buried, and told himself, the way people tell themselves things they don't fully believe, that he wasn't the one making the decisions. He'd started quietly cooperating with the SEC inquiry 6 weeks ago. Not out of courage. He was honest enough with himself to know that. Out of self-preservation. The inquiry was low-level, early stage, and when the investigator reached out through his personal attorney, Derek had provided limited documents. Just enough to demonstrate good faith. Testing the water, his attorney had called it. The water had been manageable then. Watching Priya lay everything bare on television, Derek understood that the water was no longer manageable. It was boiling. He sat on his couch for a long time. Long enough for the drink to go warm. Long enough for the coverage to cycle through twice. Long enough for Danica Hilton's name to appear on his phone screen once. A call he watched ring through to voicemail without moving. He didn't listen to the voicemail. He picked up his phone and called his attorney. His attorney called Charlie's attorney at 3:15. Derek had documentation of everything. Not the limited, carefully selected documents he'd provided to the SEC inquiry. Everything. The full email chain between Danica and her PR firm, dated 3 days before the term sheet was signed. The communications authorizing the media hit. The strategy documents outlining the plan to void the deal and locate a compliant buyer with no community benefit requirements. Signing had always been the trap. Every word of it, the late-night phone call, Garfield's aggressive pushback on the resignation clause, the 2 minutes to midnight signature, had been theater. A performance designed to create a window. While Charlie's team exhaled, Danica's people were already on the phone with journalists. Derek had the emails. He had the names. He had the identity of the PR firm she'd paid to plant the story. A firm with no listed connection to Hilton Meridian, used specifically to keep Danica's fingerprints off the leak. He provided everything. Charlie's attorney called at 3:41. Charlie listened without interrupting, standing at his office window with the city spread out below him, and Grace watching his face from across the room. When his attorney finished, Charlie was quiet for exactly 10 seconds. "File everything with the SEC tonight," he said. He lowered the phone. Outside, Atlanta moved through its Friday afternoon. Traffic building on the expressway, the sky shifting toward the long golden light of early evening, 2,200 families in southwest Atlanta living their ordinary lives in the homes they didn't yet know had already been fought for and won. The subpoena arrived at Danica Hilton's home address at 7 o'clock Saturday morning. She was already awake, already dressed. She'd spent Friday night on the phone with Garfield and 2 other attorneys, rebuilding a defense out of the wreckage of a plan that had stopped working somewhere between Priya's press conference and Derek Ashby's call to the SEC. By the time the process server knocked on her door, she had 3 legal strategies and a public relations firm on standby. She signed for the document, closed the door, read it standing in her entryway. Senate Subcommittee on Housing and Urban Affairs. Emergency Field Hearing. Atlanta. 9 a.m. She had 2 hours. The hearing room was a converted ballroom on the second floor of a federal building in downtown Atlanta. High ceilings, long tables arranged in a U-shape, seats for witnesses at one end and the subcommittee panel at the other. By 8:45, the room was full. Staffers, attorneys, journalists, including Caroline Secrest and Keisha Mander, seated in the press row with recorders already running. Members of the public filled the back rows, standing room only by the time the doors were officially opened. Danica arrived with 3 attorneys. She sat at the witness table with her portfolio in front of her and her spine perfectly straight. The posture of someone who had faced difficult rooms before and survived them. She had not faced a room like this before. At 9 o'clock exactly, Senator Paul Orvis entered and took his seat at the center of the panel. He was 58 years old, a broad-shouldered man with close-cropped gray at his temples and the unhurried, deliberate presence of someone who had been doing serious work for a long time and had no interest in performing it. He didn't arrange papers theatrically, didn't let his gaze sweep the room for effect. He simply sat down, put on his reading glasses, and opened the folder in front of him. "This hearing is called to order," he said. His voice was quiet. It filled the room completely. The first witness was a woman named Dorothea Barnes, 71 years old, Linwood Street, 3rd generation. She testified by video from a community center in Decatur, seated at a folding table with her hands folded in front of her. She described moving into her apartment at Linwood Street in 1987, described raising her daughter there, described the Hilton Meridian representatives who came to the building in 2015 with promises and clipboards and warm, reassuring smiles, described the letter she received in 2017 informing her that her unit had been reclassified and her lease would not be renewed. She was 63 years old when she left. She'd been in an assisted living facility since then, not by choice, but because the options available to a 63-year-old woman with no housing and a fixed income were limited. She spoke for 7 minutes in a voice that didn't waver once. Danica Hilton looked at the table in front of her throughout the testimony. The HOD official came next, then the Grayson Commons documentation, then Derek Ashby. Derek took his seat at the witness table with the particular posture of a man who had made a decision and was living inside it now, with all the discomfort that entailed. He answered every question put to him by the subcommittee counsel in the flat, precise language of someone who had spent the previous 18 hours in conversation with his attorney, rehearsing exactly this. He confirmed the Grayson Commons transfers, confirmed the arbitration strategy, confirmed the pre-planned media hit, the PR firm, the email chain, the authorization. He confirmed that Danica Hilton had signed the term sheet with full knowledge and intention that it would never be honored. He did not look at Danica once during his testimony. Danica's attorneys objected to 3 questions. Orvis sustained 1. Then came Priya. She sat at the witness table in a navy blazer she'd borrowed from Grace that morning, slightly too long in the sleeves, which somehow made her look more real, not less. She was 27 years old, and she had lost her job and spent 8 months carrying something heavy in the bottom of a laptop bag. And she sat there in front of a Senate subcommittee and told the truth, with a composure that settled over the room like weather. When she finished, Keisha Mander had stopped typing and was simply watching. Then Danica was called. She answered the first question with a carefully constructed response about market conditions, the second with a reference to proper legal channels, the third with a statement about the complexity of municipal development agreements. On the fourth question, concerning the Cascade Commons strategy memo and the annotated Phase 3 timeline, Garfield leaned toward her and said something quietly. Danica straightened her blazer. "On the advice of counsel," she said, "I invoke my Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. 1. 2. On the Grayson Commons transfers. 3. On the HUD grant diversion. 4. 5. 6. Each invocation landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. No splash. Just the ring spreading outward, touching every wall. 7. 8. 9. In the press row, Caroline Seacrest was writing without looking at her notepad. 10. 11. The 11th invocation fell into complete silence. Senator Orvis let the silence stand for a full 5 seconds. Then he made a note in his folder, removed his reading glasses, and looked up at the room. "The final witness," he said, "is Mr. Charlie Ellison." Charlie walked to the witness table in a polo shirt and his leather watch. He sat down, adjusted the microphone, looked at the subcommittee panel, at Orvis, who gave him nothing from the bench, just the steady, expectant look of a man who had known him for 20 years and was ready to hear him speak. Charlie did not speak about himself. He spoke about Emma, about the Memphis development she had grown up in, about the promise she had made him keep, about the day 12 years ago when she put this watch on his wrist and told him that money was only as good as what you built with it. He spoke about 2,200 families in southwest Atlanta. He spoke about Priya Orwig, who risked everything on a Tuesday morning with a laptop bag and 340 followers, and the specific, unshakable courage of someone who had decided that looking away was no longer something she was willing to do. He did not raise his voice once. When he finished, the room was completely silent. Senator Orvis sat with his pen resting on the folder. He didn't write anything, didn't reach for his reading glasses, just sat with the weight of what he'd heard and let it be what it was. Then he closed the hearing. The consequences didn't arrive slowly. They came all at once, the way things do when pressure has been building long enough. Not a gradual unraveling, but a sudden, complete collapse. Everything falling at the same moment, from the same height. Monday morning, the city of Atlanta suspended every active Hilton Meridian municipal contract pending investigation. All 7. $340 million in projects. Frozen mid-stride, like a photograph of something in the middle of falling. The announcement came from the mayor's office at 9 a.m. in a statement that was brief and precise and left no room for interpretation. By 10, the SEC issued a formal notice confirming the opening of a fraud investigation into Hilton Meridian's bond practices. The notice cited testimony from the Saturday hearing and documentary evidence filed by Derek Ashby's legal team Friday night. It named Hilton Meridian specifically. It named no one else. It didn't need to. At 11:15, Hilton Meridian's board of directors convened an emergency session. The vote was 7-0. Danica Hilton was removed as CEO effective immediately. She was in her office when building security arrived. 2 of them. Professional, quiet. The same measured efficiency that Brody had brought to walking Charlie Ellison to the elevator 6 days ago. Except this time, there was no meeting to get back to. No presentation waiting on the screen. No floor full of people pretending not to watch. They were all watching. Through the same glass walls that had displayed Charlie's escort to every person on the 34th floor last Tuesday morning, the entire office watched Danica Hilton pick up her personal items. The framed photograph from her desk, her portfolio, the cream-colored blazer she draped over the back of her chair, and walk with the 2 security officers toward the elevator. She kept her spine straight, kept her chin up. But the room she walked through was not the room she had commanded 6 days ago. It was the same glass, the same carpet, the same furniture. But something essential had shifted in it. The particular atmosphere of unchallenged authority that had kept an entire floor looking at their screens while a man was walked out for no reason other than the assumptions of the woman now being escorted toward those same elevator doors. That atmosphere was gone. The elevator opened. Danica stepped inside. The doors closed. The 34th floor exhaled. Charlie restructured the investment that afternoon. Not the original deal, not the acquisition of Hilton Meridian, not the transfer of $500 million to a company whose board was now in crisis management and whose CEO had just invoked the Fifth Amendment 11 times in a federal hearing. Something better. Something that couldn't be undone by a board vote or a resignation clause or a midnight signature made in bad faith. His legal team worked through the afternoon on a new framework. By early evening, it was done. The Cascade Commons Community Trust, an independent nonprofit private partnership, capitalized by a $500 million investment from Ellison Capital, governed by a community-elected oversight board with full legal authority over every development decision. The 2,200 families in southwest Atlanta, protected by deed restriction for 30 years. Built to own units, fixed affordability requirements, no reclassification mechanism of any kind. No Phase 3, no 14-month timeline, no version of the document, in any language, in any filing, in any city permit application, that left a door open for what Hilton Meridian had done to Linwood Street, to Grayson Commons, to the 212 families from Parkview South who had watched the same smooth promises play out and believed them right up until the letter arrived. The trust was real, permanent, built to outlast the people who built it. 2 days later, Charlie drove to Memphis. He went alone. No Grace, no legal team, no agenda. Just the drive and the city and the building on Greer Street, where Emma had grown up. It still stood. That always mattered to him. The fact that it still stood. Same brick. Same iron railings on the front steps. Same row of mailboxes in the lobby. The old brass-colored ones. Some of the name slots still showing the same family names from decades back. He sat on the bench across the street and looked at it for a while. He was turning the watch over in his fingers, the leather band worn soft at the edges now, the face slightly scratched from 12 years of daily wear, when he heard footsteps on the sidewalk behind him. Grace sat down, handed him a coffee, without a word. They sat together in the late afternoon quiet, the Memphis street easy and unhurried around them, the building across the road holding everything it had always held. Danica's attorneys filed a motion this morning, Grace said eventually. Preliminary injunction against the SEC investigation. Garfield's arguing procedural grounds. Charlie nodded slowly. They'll file 3 more after that one fails, Grace said. Then probably a civil suit. Could drag on 2 years. He looked at the building across the street, at the mailboxes visible through the lobby glass, at the light moving across the brick in the late afternoon way that light moves across brick when it has been doing so for a long time. Let them file, Charlie said. He turned his face toward the light. Thought about 2,200 families in southwest Atlanta. About Dorothea Barnes, 71 years old, testifying at a folding table in a community center with her hands folded and her voice completely steady. About Priya Orwig, in a borrowed blazer, with sleeves slightly too long, telling the truth in front of a Senate subcommittee because she had decided 8 months ago in the bottom of a laptop bag that the truth deserved to be kept somewhere safe, until someone was ready to use it. About Emma. About the watch. About the only promise that had ever really mattered. We already built the thing, he said. Grace wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. The Memphis street moved around them, slow and ordinary, and full of people living their lives in the places they called home. The bench was warm in the afternoon sun. Neither of them moved for a long time. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.